As cold as winter, the body dies. In cold ground, the body lies. November winds still chill the bones of spirits yet to come. The fall of life upon indeed. For fall, the body does. When winter reaches for your soul, dead tree branch arms extended, lay your fear of death aside, because your life has ended. As white as snow, the afterlife, as coveted as peace. You'll trade your pain for cold interment. In death, your pain will cease. As cold as snow, your lifeless sight, a window to the living light. The living breathe and laugh and cry. You watch and you lament. As chill a cold as winter night, you shiver as you watch the light. The frozen souls of winter watch you live, and they lament.
Nathan Merritt tossed and turned, trying not to disturb his sleeping wife. Insomnia birthed a welling depression which he preferred not to spread to Nadine. He palmed the sweat from his eyes and consoled himself with the excuse that the oppressive summer heat was responsible for his insomnia, but introspectively, Nathan knew that this was not the truth. The fat man from his dreams was the force which denied Nathan the privilege of restful slumber, the hooded man who laughed at Nathan from the darkened corners of the bedroom. Nathan had yet to see this terrible presence clearly, but he occasionally caught glimpses in the shadows, brief and constant images that stole across his vision in the night. Furtive visions of pallid wax-like flesh, sagging from beneath the darkness of a hooded cloak, a darkness marred by dimly glowing dull gray eyes, orbs which penetrated the blackness with the intensity of match flames. The fat man from his dreams taunted and threatened, but if there was some warning that Nathan was supposed to heed, he could never completely recall that message upon waking. Lately, Nathan just tried not to sleep at all. The effort was fatuous, of course, and the physical strain succeeded only in draining him of vital energy during the days. Nathan knew that some remote psychic coil had to give in to the tremendous pressure that was bearing down upon him relentlessly. Nathan stared at the ceiling, drenched in sweat and exhausted from the frustration and overwhelming sense of helplessness. He would have acted before this if he knew where to begin. He owned only vague notions as to the identity of the malevolent presence lurking in the recesses of his mind, but making a true connection only tired him further and usually left him nursing a migraine. Nathan's dreams had brought him to the edge of obsession, haunting him nightly with the spectral images of the hooded man and of the hollow, forgotten manor house of the original property, which stood on the opposite side of the ravine from his ranch. Nathan knew the history of that desiccated mansion, as well as his connection to it, but he could not understand why it beckoned to him so desperately. Every time Nathan felt as though the answers to his current problems were attainable, his focus would haze, and his thoughts became muddled and fragmented. Nathan's lack of concentration was as frustrating as the dreams themselves, and to make matters worse, his small horse ranch was going broke. His last assets were dwindling away, and the only viable option left was filing bankruptcy. Nathan often wondered if his haunting nightmares were affecting his mind to the degree that they might even be indirectly responsible for his present financial breakdown. The ranch had been willed to him by his father, along with a generous portion of the vast family fortune, but those provisions were dwindling away. The multi-million-dollar estate originally owned by Adam Straub had been cut and bled away, long before Nathan's father, Dwight Merritt, received his own small claim. Nathan struggled to fend off expenses and the relentless overhead with his own income, which was barely enhanced by the marketing and breeding of his livestock. Nathan closed his eyes, and that strained psychic coil finally snapped under the constant weight. An integral fuse within his tattered mind exploded. His breakers had exceeded their load capacity. The time for some form of response had arrived, refusing to be denied any longer. Nathan had no true plan of action, but his brain writhed in desperation inside his skull. Glancing first to his still sleeping wife, Nathan slowly turned his sights to the small round alarm clock beside his side of the bed. The clock laughed at Nathan in metered ticks, and mutely informed him that it was 3:44 a.m. Holding his breath and moving slowly, Nathan slipped from the soaking sheets. He dressed hurriedly in a pair of dungarees and a sleeveless t-shirt before creeping barefoot out of the bedroom. Nathan paused before closing the door behind him. Softer than the creaking of the door, softer than the faint rush of his own breath, the whispered sound of chuckling burbled from behind him. Nadine was still sound asleep and alone in the room. Nathan rubbed his bloodshot eyes and closed the door as quietly as his trembling hands could manage. He took a deep breath, meant to calm his nerves, but it failed miserably. As he walked through the darkened house to the small desk in the corner of the living room. The desk was covered with a disarrayed scattering of bills and invoices, but he paid no attention to these as he pulled open the top left-hand drawer. Nervous and groggy, he stared at the pistol sitting on top of a black ledger. In the faint light of the room, the weapon looked massive. The glint of carbon steel outlined the barrel, and Nathan would have felt more comfortable reaching in after a snake. He pushed the drawer shut and left the pistol unmolested, knowing all too well that whatever battle was to come at the end of his current road to madness, a weapon such as this would help him very little indeed. There would be no physical enemy to conquer that night, but a phantasmal one, and the battleground would be within his own mind as he fought to retain his health and quite possibly his sanity. As hot as it was outside, even at this ungodly hour, it was still much cooler than inside the house. The faintest breath of wind stirred the higher leaves of the trees and cooled the glistening moisture on his chest and brow. There were no clouds, and the stars burned intensely, without the dimming influence of the moon. The entire world seemed to be illuminated in layers of deep blue and black, yet visibility was surprisingly clear. Nathan could see his goal, perched at the top of the other side of the ravine behind his hay barn. The vacant mansion of Adam Straub stood silhouetted against the gun-blue tincture of the sky, and it laughed at Nathan silently, goading him on. Nathan trudged across his yard, eager to put to rest his mad endeavor. He marched past the imposing structure of the hay barn and continued beyond the stables, where his remaining stock of horses broke the stifling silence with grunts and unmetered hoofbeats. Crossing the hewn wooden fence behind the stables held a symbolism which brought Nathan some measure of courage to continue. The light of the stars held little influence now as Nathan descended into the gully toward the small creek at the bottom of the gorge. Frogs and crickets sang loudly, and the sound was welcomed company to Nathan. The unconducted symphony helped him to relax, and even though he was not aware of it, he had stopped clenching his fists. His breath was audible and raspy, sounding much like a weak motor in his head. If the weather had been cold, he would have attributed his wheezing respiration to sickness. In the heat of a sweltering Colorado midsummer night, however, the only nameable sources for his forced breathing were exhaustion and malnutrition. Despite Nathan's labored breathing, his skin cooled and became clammy. His fingertips and bare feet felt cold as he approached the bottom of the ravine. This was a strange sensation. Since Nathan knew the temperature to be in the upper 80s, Nathan dwelt as little as possible on his physical discomfort and concentrated on crossing the small but very muddy creek. Nathan Merritt was halfway to his destination. Climbing the steep, opposing bank of the gully took the rest of Nathan's breath, and he was forced to rest momentarily upon reaching the top of the ravine. His feet, knees, and rear were caked with mud, and he cursed to himself at the indignity. The sound of his own voice alerted his attention to the fact that the monotonous choir of wildlife had grown silent. He scanned the now motionless trees and overgrown grass surrounding him and stretched out toward his goal, a barbed and stiffened carpet. Nathan was closer now, and the empty mansion continued watching him. Nathan could now see individual windows in the mansion's 3-story facade. Across the breadth of the oppressively silent forest, a peculiar broken sound caressed Nathan's ears. He strained to listen, and when he finally identified the nearly inaudible din, his first instinct was to run as fast as he could back to the relative safety of his own house. Packs of wild dogs ran the Route National Forest in large numbers, and a single unarmed man would make easy prey. The baying and barking sounds he heard then were still far away, but his fear of the dog packs nearly overpowered his resolve to exorcise his personal demons. Pausing only for a moment, Nathan inhaled deeply and took another step toward the decaying manor house of Adam Straub. A dip in the land lowered Nathan below the horizon on which the mansion stood. As he walked through the shallow vale, Nathan passed an unused utility shed, a pump, and an adjacent well. These were all landmarks with which he was familiar, and they were little more than abstractions in the starlight. His full attention was devoted to the mansion. Nathan emerged from the slight valley and restored his eye contact with the haunting and haunted manor house. He could also hear its subtle, compulsive voice, a creaking undertone of apathy and seclusion that carved away a large swath of Nathan's newfound fortitude. He continued past the desiccated husks of the stables, which marked the last obstacle between him and the forbidding structure. Regardless of the outcome, Nathan was positive that an end to the nightmares was nearing. The front door and first-floor windows were locked and boarded over, forcing Nathan to waste precious time scrounging for a hole to crawl through. In the back of the mansion, he found a basement window that was not as securely boarded as the rest of the openings. He climbed down into the small pit that arced around the subground level portal and pried the plywood free, bending the nails in the process. Nathan grunted with the exertion of pushing the tilted pane of glass back on its pleading hinges. Crawling through head first, the small passage was barely wide enough to allow his own slender form to slip through, but he managed to squirm his way inside. After wedging his torso through the window, Nathan used his hands as crutches until he could pull both of his legs down from the window. Back on his feet once more, he tried to pierce the absolute darkness of the basement but could not. He felt his way around the wall, attempting to find a path through the cluttered basement to the first floor, but the process was slow and difficult. Welling claustrophobia, something that Nathan had never experienced, ate through his waning courage, and he was overcome with the mad desire to be out of that dank and musty crypt. His footfalls and reaches were uncontrollably erratic, and his foot struck something heavy on the floor, fracturing his sense of balance. Nathan thrashed a deteriorating wooden shelf and toppled it, along with himself, to the unforgiving concrete floor. The deafening percussions of rattling and shattering glass followed him to the mildew-covered cement. The last echoes of wet glass faded, and the stench of rotting vegetation flooded his nostrils, causing his eyes to water heavily. Any accompanying blurred vision would have mattered little within the Stygian darkness of the basement, but the ache brought on by the ammonium odor nearly doubled him over with nausea. Agitated with fear and revulsion, Nathan panicked. He flailed out wildly to reach an anchor to stop his spinning equilibrium and collided with several objects, none of which he could, or cared to, identify, while he groped blindly for purchase. Nathan managed to find the stairs, but in his fervor, he slammed his shin into the first step, which was little more than a slab of 2x12 nailed to a frame. The excruciating flare of pain caused him to yelp as he fell full length across the stairs. His left elbow and his chin both struck solid wood. Nathan pulled himself up slowly, allowing the pain to clear his muddled thoughts, and he sat there on the stairs for several minutes, massaging his bruised elbow and shin. He could feel a trickle of warmth run down his chest from his chin, and he gingerly touched the bleeding wound to assess its severity. Nathan tried to relax as much as possible before he moved again, realizing that he was in the process of defeating himself. He was already wounded, and he had yet to even make it to the fight. Once more resolved, if not calmed, Nathan put soft pressure on his throbbing leg, praying that he had not fractured the bone. To his surprise, the leg bore his weight, but he limped slightly from the sharp sting. Slowly this time, Nathan walked up the steps until he met with a solid barricade, which was easily defined as a door. He fumbled for a latch or a knob, trying to open it with nervously impaired hands. A simple bolt at last slid back, and the large door rolled open on rusting hinges. The scent of decay followed Nathan from the basement into the oppressively hot atmosphere sealed inside the mansion. Illumination throughout the house was extremely poor, but he could at least see shapes and shadows. His episode of claustrophobia was passing, and a modicum of composure had settled in its place, as Nathan took the final steps towards closure. Positive that the source of his nightmares dwelt within the walls of this 3-storied corpse of a manor, All that awaited Nathan then was confrontation. Just being in this mansion again, especially under the circumstances, felt every bit as disturbing to Nathan as his recent violent dreams. The dry, rotten smell which emanated thickly from the carpets and the shreds of cloth that hung from the curtain rods only served to lend credence to his growing sense of surrealism. His reflexes seemed slower than normal, and he was not so much frightened as he was dazed. Nathan felt as though he was the puppet in the hands of a cruel puppeteer. Because the lighting inside the manor was so poor, Nathan had to rely on deceptive memory alone to navigate his way through the house. A memory of a brief visit 9 years before when the will of Adam Straub had been read. After searching the first floor in vain, Nathan probed his way to the stairwell and the remaining ramparts of the manor. Staring blindly up into the darkness of the second floor robbed him of his precious evanescing courage. He could recall with startling clarity the acrid smell of urine and infection that once filled this house. The smell still lingered in the rotting wood. Nathan was far too close to his goal to back away at that point, and even with the absolute loss of confidence, he could not abandon his quest for release, however insane it might have seemed. Deliberately, he placed his foot on the first creaking step and left the ground floor behind. Nathan wondered if the wind had picked up outside because he could hear a faint sound, much like labored breathing. He stopped climbing to listen, but this tactic offered him no clarity. The sounds were still much too distorted. He advanced another step and the whispering began. A soft, almost voiceless expelling of hot, dry air. Again, Nathan stopped, and this time he could hear words. Despite the feverish temperature inside the mansion, Nathan felt very cold as he listened to the withered monologue. A one-sided conversation that struck the chimes of recognition, since these were the same words he had heard every night under the opaque veil of sleep. These words told him that his own miserable life was no longer his to control. The sear, hissing voice taunted and jeered, promising him that he would never leave this house again. Nathan had come home. He wanted to turn and run, but his feet continued climbing up the stairs. Even though Nathan had heard the speech, it had been received on a lesser level than the spoken word meeting the physical ear. The words rang as bell knolls against the base of his skull. He could fully understand what the voice was whispering to him, but comprehension owned a hazy quality, a psychic fog. At the top of the staircase, the second-floor hallway ran perpendicular with the stairs, and the steps leading up to the third floor were directly across from where he stood. Without any desire to do so, but unable to stop himself, Nathan crossed the hall and continued his ascension. Nathan was nearing the third floor when he thought he could see an even darker image limned in the shadows in the center of the hall above him. The lighting was too poor for him to be sure, but he could see the silhouette of an obese man wearing a billowing, oversized hooded robe. Nathan climbed another step and froze as the eyes from beneath the hood opened, igniting 2 dim gray match flames from out of the nothingness of the shadow. Nathan had come here for answers, and he found the knowledge to be bittersweet fruit indeed. In that single terrifying moment, he realized that coming here had been a consequential mistake, and that the penalty would be much more horrible than base insomnia or even insanity. Nathan could not move, even though his brain screamed the command to run to his jellied legs. He was the deer standing in the glow of 2 dim headlights. The whispering took on a harsher tone, a physical quality, and Nathan Merritt knew that he had been told the truth. He would never be leaving this house, not ever again. Too entranced to panic or even whimper, Nathan gazed into the depths of those vacant gray orbs of cold light. He understood that here was the release for which he yearned. Nathan longed to be free of fear and the material burdens of finance, and here was the key to his fetters. His stance broke at last, and Nathan could move once more, but not to retreat. As he lessened the number of steps between himself and the shadowed third floor, his mental focus on the image before him sharpened. The whispering, grating voice spoke to him one last time as Nathan reached the top step. "I want it back."